Child's Play is a movie about a grown man desperately trying to get inside of a little boy, and the movie about the extreme danger that gingers pose to our society. Starting back in 1988, back when it was still socially acceptable to blow cigarette smoke directly into your infant's face, and slapping your wife about after a few beers was referred to as blowing off steam, Chucky sees the story of Charles Lee Ray, otherwise known as the Lakeshore Strangler, a seasoned serial killer who miserably fails at killing a preschooler. Being shot dead by a police officer due to strangling people alongside the shore of a lake generally being frowned upon by society, using voodoo magic taught to him by an instructor named John Bishop, with his final and dying breath, Charles manages to switch his soul from his pink liquid-filled flesh sack, which, unlike this video of a respectable young woman I just watched on the hub, is prone to the unfortunate side effect of falling over and dying when metal foreign objects penetrate it at great speed, and instead placing it in a piece of hard plastic known as a good guy doll, plagued with the unfortunate curse of being a ginger. Sometime later, a woman named Karen Barkley finds a housingly challenged man in the alleyway behind her work selling one, and she decides to take advantage of someone in an incredibly vulnerable position and lowball them, because she believes that the homeless aren't real people. She brings the good guy doll home for her son Andy's birthday to make up for the unfortunate fact that he is from Chicago. And Andy, being far more happy with this present compared to his trousers that she gave him earlier to signify just how much she hates him, asks the doll what its name is, and it responds with Chucky. Chucky from Rugrats if he had a debilitating heroin addiction. And despite it being her young son's birthday, with her already working a shift in the day, Karen is forced to go back for a night shift as her best friend Maggie babysits, because capitalism is great and is really fun. The reason Chucky's mortal vessel ended up receiving a few extra breathing holes is because of his partner in crime, Eddie Caputo, ended up fleeing the scene due to their fun little activity of murdering people for fun having this neat little side effect known as consequences for their actions. In the process, leaving Chucky stranded, leading him to the rational and sane conclusion that he should transfer his soul into a fleshlight with legs. After getting out of bed like the naughty little boy that he is to watch the news report about Eddie getting away, a burning hatred is ignited in his heart against all baked goods as he throws all of the flour on the floor, as well as a burning hatred for Maggie as he throws her out of the window because screw that car in particular. Karen returns home after a nice long shift of police negligence, as apparently not one single police officer thought it was a good idea to call her, despite a literal 6-year-old being present at the scene of someone attempting to outdo gravity. The homicide detective, the same one that thought Charles's jacket didn't have nearly enough ventilation in it, is at the apartment and insinuates that Andy is the one responsible for Maggie's death, before straight up saying that Andy isn't the one responsible for Maggie's death, because it's just a prank, bro. Andy tries to tell them both that it was Chucky and his real name is Charles Lee Ray, telling them that Chucky said Maggie was a bitch and she got what she deserved. The detective, not quite sure if this is good old-fashioned child imagination with a side of schizophrenia, doesn't take what Andy says seriously and leaves with all of the other police officers because police work is hard and they can't be bothered to do it. The next day, after somehow being sent to school despite his babysitter's impromptu skydiving session, Chucky convinces him to walk right out of the school, because I guess that's a thing kids can just do, and get on the train to head to Eddie's hideout. After arriving at the part of town filled with all of the gross poor people, Andy goes to pee, giving Chucky the perfect opportunity to run towards Eddie's house and turn the gas stove on, because Eddie may be a homicidal maniac living in an abandoned house, but he always pays his utility bills. Hearing noises, Eddie lets out his inner Frank Reynolds and starts blasting, before coming to the realization that he really hates his kitchen, and that he's going to shoot it. But when he does shoot it, the kitchen shoots back, and the gas filling the room causes the entire building to explode, because his cooking was simply to die for. With Andy being found at yet another crime scene involving a rather suspicious death, and with no one seeming to question how a literal 6-year-old boy and his Cabbage Patch looking ass friend were able to track down a wanted fugitive, Andy's placed into psychiatric care at the Children's Hospital, because quite frankly that's far easier for the police to do than admit that they've just been outsmarted by someone who occasionally shits themselves. Speaking of unwanted depositories being left in the trouser leg, Karen, back home with Chucky, notices that the batteries were never put inside the doll, and screams after checking for herself, because there's nothing quite as terrifying as an empty hole. After threatening to throw Chucky into the fire unless he talks, he calls her a not very nice word that Jesus wouldn't approve of, before unfortunately for her, she catches one of the most vile and horrific curses, as she's bitten by a ginger kid. Being outrun by a 2-foot-tall piece of plastic like a toddler on crack, Chucky takes off into the street as Karen chases, where she then goes to find the homicide detective, who unfortunately for her isn't a fan of women and these little things called their own opinions. After not being interested in helping her, she goes out to find the homeless man who originally sold her the doll, where he then attempts to sell her an unwanted STD before she's saved by the detective, who actually decided to do something for once. After finding out that the doll was scavenged from the very toy store that the detective killed Charles in, he heads back to the police station to check on his files, as he's realised that maybe he should do at least the very bare minimum required work. On the way out, he's attacked by a certain strawberry-haired manlet who attempts to choke him out with a handful of wires because the gingers do not respect the police. And apparently they're incredibly strong too, as this clearly grown man is given an impromptu strangle-dangle session without the fun part, as he desperately concentrates on the art of not horrifically dying. After getting Chucky to stop, the best way you'd get a toddler-sized person to stop misbehaving: melting their face with a lighter. The car flips and the detective shoots Chucky in the chest, just like he did to Charles's original body when he created the Forbidden Glory Hole. The detective and Karen end up going to Charles's house to discover that the walls are covered in respectable and modest artwork depicting the average Big Will meetup. Hung naked dudes covered in blood, on their knees in front of large black men. After learning that Charles used to spend a lot of time on his knees around a man named John Bishop, they go to pay him a visit. But Chucky's already been there first, and has unfortunately had to murder him after being given the horrific news that he's about to spend the rest of his life as a ginger in a vertically challenged person's body. That is, unless he can transfer his soul into the first person he revealed his secret to, before he becomes too human. After being told that Chucky is about to do a Prince Andrew, and desperately try to manipulate himself inside of a minor, with John's dying breath, he tells the pair that the only way to stop Chucky now is to destroy the heart, because that's where the pee is stored. Chucky sneaks into the psychiatric hospital, because that's where all the fun people live, but Andy manages to outsmart him on account of Chucky being a stupid fucking doll. That is, until a doctor grabs him and attempts to sedate him, because much like Prince Andrew, the correct answer is always drug kids. Chucky, for some reason, not wanting to wait for the already fleeing kid to be nicely sedated for him, decides to kill the doctor with some good old-fashioned electroshock therapy, the type that they gave women back in the 50s for daring to have audacious things known as their own opinions. Which gives Andy the chance to get away. After learning that a 6-year-old managed to escape a psychiatric hospital with ease, Karen and the detective realise that Andy will be heading straight home because he's 6 and literally doesn't know anywhere else, except maybe the local McDonald's. Infuriated that Andy didn't bring him one of those Oreo McFlurries, Chucky hits him over the head with a baseball bat because he prefers it when his children are a little bit more like vegetables. Karen and the detective get home and chaos ensues, as people are bit, chunks of plastic are shot, and grown men trained to protect and serve are knocked unconscious by toddlers with severe anger issues. Chucky is thrown into the fireplace for time out, before being set on fire by Andy as he lights the match, because he wonders what it'll smell like. Once they think that Chucky is dead, he commits the criminal offence of child endangerment by tripping Andy over, because kids falling down will always be hilarious. Much like genital warts, Chucky simply won't die no matter how many times you horrifically burn him, leaving Karen with no choice but to repeatedly shoot off all of his limbs until eventually he stops moving. After they're done playing this elaborate game of dollies, but with a slight amount more of mental illness, the detective's partner arrives to make fun of these virgin losers for taking their collectible dolls so seriously, when suddenly he's grabbed around the throat by a malfunctioning Hitachi magic wand before he's shot through the heart by the detective. And the movie comes to an end with the entire world thinking that they're all just insane, refusing to take the rather terrifying threat of gingers very seriously at all. Fun fact, despite Chucky being controlled by a complicated set of animatronics and a team of incredibly talented puppeteers, multiple shots were filmed with the help of a man named Ed Gale in a suit. Ed Gale being someone who shares somewhat of a similar interest with Chucky, as he desperately attempts to meet up with minors to conduct despicable acts. 2 years pass, and much like Ed Gale, allegedly, and the average League of Legends player, Chucky doesn't learn his lesson after law enforcement intervention and seeks out little boys because he's, lonely. Chucky's recovered from police evidence, and the company who originally created the doll somehow thinks that the best way to dispel the rumours about there being a sentient psychotic killer doll is to restore it and say, "See, we don't kill kids." Well, not until the third movie anyway. During this time, we find out that really suiting a lobotomy, Andy's mother Karen is being held under psychiatric observation due to the heinous crime of being female. Andy currently lives in a children's crisis centre, and the police are denying everything about it because they're currently too busy beating up minorities. Sullivan, the CEO of the company who created the doll, gets a front row seat to witness Chucky receive some of the meanest head I've ever seen, before the operator is electrocuted due to a machine malfunction and sent flying backwards through a window for using too much teeth. And much like the average billionaire looking down on all of the disgusting poor people who smell kinda funny, Sullivan goes, "That's not my problem," and leaves it for someone else to clean up. And just like when you go to choose a new dog from the shelter, Andy's finally fostered by the Simpsons family, who hopes that he isn't the type to shit on the carpet. The Simpsons also foster another kid named Kyle, because apparently they really need that foster money, as they've got a little kid factory going on in here. They've even got him doing chores around the house. These guys have figured it out. After leaving a good guy doll in a room now belonging to the kid who was horribly traumatized by a good guy doll, Joanne takes it away after having a little bit of fun mentally damaging the kid, and we see that the original Chucky doll is taken from the factory by one of the employees. The original Chucky doll, who uses the employee's car phone to find out the exact location of Andy's whereabouts in minutes, as children's health and safety precautions are merely a suggestion. He then suffocates the man to death with a plastic bag as he summons the strength of 1,000 toddlers, as he then infiltrates the family's house and assassinates the previous good guy doll with the Simpsons' sentimentally priceless family heirloom. We see Kyle and Andy begin to bond due to the fact that no one loves them and that they're forever alone, and Chucky, wasting no time in doing questionable things to small little boys as they sleep, wakes Andy up later that night after restraining him to the bed, because despite having quite literally the world's worst luck at holding this kid down and saying a few little funny sounding words in this made up language known as Haitian, apparently it brings him that much pleasure to mentally torment an 8-year-old boy because he simply can't help himself. I too am fueled by the tears of children, which of course results in him almost immediately being interrupted by Kyle as she sneaks back into the house through his bedroom window, where she's left thinking that this kid is completely and utterly fucked in the head for doing this to himself. After all of the commotion alerts Phil and Joanne, Chucky's thrown into the cellar for being a ginger, which in turn causes his nose to bleed in the process, meaning that once again he's turning into a human, cursed with the horrible affliction known as being short. The next day, after sneaking onto the school bus with Andy and writing a really lovely, encouraging note to his teacher, he's held back for detention due to his egregious handwriting skills, immediately followed by him saying "no thank you" and climbing out of the window because he simply cannot be detained and learning is for dumb people. After making the smarterest decision of his life and fleeing, the teacher returns to see that the school is haunted by a ghost with Parkinson's disease, as the cupboard in the corner of the room is repeatedly shaking, and after opening it up, thinking that Andy locked himself inside of it looking for the alternative entrance to Narnia, Chucky performs an at-home breast enlargement surgery on the woman as he stabs her in the chest with a ball pump before beating her to death with a ruler for committing the disgusting sin of teaching math. Much like the Mongols did to literally everyone because they felt like it, Andy comes to the conclusion that if you want something dead, you're gonna have to do it yourself. So later that evening, he arms himself with an electric carving knife and heads down into the basement and fucking kills his dad. Except he doesn't, because his real dad went to the store for cigarettes and milk a long time ago because he hates him, and Chucky tripped Phil, causing him to land on his exceptionally heavy cranium and die, making it look like Andy did it. Andy's then sent back to the Children's Crisis Center because this kid's defective, and Kyle, still at the Simpsons' house, throws the Chucky doll in the trash. After accidentally unearthing the previous doll dismembered and buried by Chucky, because apparently the dustbin is far too much of a complicated complex for him, she heads back to the trash can and he's gone. Coming to the conclusion that she is indeed a schizophrenic, Kyle immediately grabs a knife because she knows how to have a good time. She then finds Joanne with a slight amount of ketchup around her neck, as eating is something she really struggles with, before Chucky attacks her from behind, like some kind of magically appearing, hyperactive psychotic toddler. And much like your average hyperactive toddler, she throws it across the room. After tripping Kyle over and holding the knife to her face, he then makes her drive him to the Children's Crisis Center because he has a seriously unhealthy obsession with prepubescent little boys. Speaking of priests, Chucky then gets himself some head, and by head I mean he's thrown through the front window of the car, as Kyle slams the brakes and attempts to run him over. But much like my girlfriend after I've taken my medication, he's completely disappeared. And apparently being overcome with the sheer and overwhelming urge to feel the cold night's breeze, Kyle gets out of the car instead of simply not doing that, to immediately be recaptured by Chucky. After pulling the fire alarm to get Andy to appear, Chucky proceeds to stab an employee through the chest, as Kyle and Andy just kinda look on like, whoa, that's crazy. Chucky makes off with Andy, and Kyle follows them in her car after spotting them getting a ride on the back of a truck. She forces the truck driver to pull over by being an average woman driver, before chasing Chucky and Andy into the good guy factory, where Chucky begins performing the ritual. But it's too late, as he's been outsmarted by an 8-year-old. After going to kill Andy out of frustration, As you do. Kyle saves his life due to the skillful utilization of the deadly weapon known as a cardboard box, and the pair make a run for it. After redirecting Chucky's life to become quite successful on one of those amputee fetish websites, he forces the knife into his new stump so he can get stumping. And stumping is exactly what he does, if the term stumping is described as murdering people. The apparent single employee in this entire operational factory comes to check a clogged conveyor belt, caused due to the antics of Kyle and Andy as they're desperately trying to run away from the funny looking G.I. Joe toy, and Chucky cuts him across the face, causing him to be held down by a machine and gently murdered to death as pistons fire plastic eyeballs directly into his brain. Kyle, coming to the realization of, wait, why am I running from this little fellow when I could literally just not do that, knocks him onto a machine that punctures him into place, before he's taken up a conveyor belt into a large machine that leaves him looking like the average member of the Kardashian family after spending too much time in the suntan machine. And much like the Kardashians, that melted pile of plastic is only half of him, and just like they do in their spare time, Chucky's too busy playing with corpses. He swings it into Kyle, which knocks her unconscious and onto the conveyor belt, and as Andy's left wondering how a man already half the size of a man could possibly set up that scenario, Chucky begins dragging his disabled looking ass over to Andy, before Andy releases a valve that sprays him with molten plastic, melting him. Again. After saving Kyle from the bimbo machine just in time, cosplaying as an unborn fetus, Chucky jumps up at Kyle before she forces an exposed electrical wire into his mouth to expose the inside of his body, as for some reason he just kind of explodes. 8 years pass since the previous events of Child's Play 2, because much like a case of herpes, Chucky's here to stay and pop up consistently throughout your life at the most inopportune moments. But only 1 year has passed since the creation of Child's Play 2, because money is good, and I would like more of it, please. And apparently it would seem that the people behind the creation of the Good Guy dolls haven't quite learnt their lesson yet, because much like my undiagnosed autism, they're about to create some issues. The factory from the end of the last movie is cleaned up, and we see that the physics in the Child's Play universe don't quite make sense, in that I mean that there aren't any. Somehow, Chucky's got the wettest, juiciest, moistest blood of them all, as it drips into a vat of goop, hopefully not used to create vaginal essence scented candles, but more dolls. Chucky is somehow able to be reborn a third time with his ancient voodoo magic, but doesn't have enough points to choose a new player model. The Good Guy dolls are put back into production again, and Mr. Sullivan receives the first one. That character's so based from the previous movie that didn't care when his employees died, because low-wage workers don't count as real entities. Which of course means Chucky uses a jar full of marbles to take him to the floor before choking him to death with a yo-yo. Yay, murder. Once again, Chucky has a new body, so much like the average To Catch a Predator star, he must find an underage boy. Andy, now 16 years old and still with no mother, because she thinks he smells weird or something, has been sent to military school. Because there's nothing more American than sending a seriously disturbed and psychologically damaged kid, constantly connected to suspicious deaths, and teaching them how to kill people. Andy then gets his 1990s and 2020s mullet shaved off as his new friend Tyler sits there, and begins to have a panic attack at the sight of the Good Guy cartoon on TV, as he looks as if he's just remembered that he forgot to turn his oven off, except he doesn't have an oven, he's in military school, and no one loves him. Andy sent a Good Guy doll in the mail, thanks to his good buddy old pal Charles, because there's nothing 16-year-old boys like more in this world than children's toys made for infants. Especially the bronies. His friend Tyler is tasked with delivering it to him, but upon finding out what's contained inside the package, he decides to steal it for himself, because kids are little shits. Wanting to teach Tyler a lesson about stealing people's property, Chucky plans to steal his entire existence, as now he's got a new body. He thinks that technically Tyler is the first person he's exposed his secret to, kind of forgetting about that time he turned an old guy into a paraplegic for the lols. So with Chucky's plan already not making any sense, and Chucky's incredibly poor track record of getting away with doing things to little boys, he's immediately interrupted midway through the ritual, because of course he is. The Colonel takes the Chucky doll away from Tyler, because this was the 1990s when you beat your kids and called them homophobic slurs for not sticking to made-up age-appropriate norms. He goes to throw Chucky into the dumpster, because boys shouldn't be playing with dolls as it does things to their brains. You know, unlike sleeping, showering, and changing around other boys. That just builds character. On the way to the dumpster, both Chucky and Andy lock eyes, like long-lost friends finally being reunited to remember the good old times involving murder, fear, extreme psychological damage, and a little bit more murder. After being put into the back of the garbage truck, Chucky convinces the driver to climb into the back for this rather elaborate game of hide and seek, where he then proceeds to crush him to death, because I guess he just kind of felt like it. And like the average member of the British monarchy, not missing a chance to sneak into a little boy's room, Chucky ambushes Andy later that night, as he doesn't want him to get in the way of the ritual between him and Tyler, when he could have just as easily, literally not done that. Technically, Andy didn't know that that doll was Chucky. As far as he knew, Chucky died one whole movie ago. He could have just let him be, and could have got on with his plan, with Andy being none the wiser. But now he's put himself in a position to immediately mess up his plan, with his plan immediately being messed up. Cadet Lieutenant Colonel Shelton, making a habit of entering the boys' bedrooms at night, walks in and makes fun of Andy for playing with a doll, before taking it for himself, so he can play with a doll. Andy, now realizing that he needs to stop Chucky once again, but this time to save his friend Tyler, as apparently the psychopathic, inept child killer doll thought it was a great idea to tell his entire plan to the kids that made a mockery out of him when he was 8 years old. Andy sneaks into Shelton's room to find Chucky, but is startled by him instead, resulting in him accidentally sitting on Shelton's lap, which is actually one of his favourite activities. Using this opportunity to turn the entire school against Andy, Shelton has them all outside in the dark conducting drills, because there's nothing quite as riveting as walking around in circles. The crackhead outside of my local shop does it all the time. While playing a nice friendly game of hide the soul with Tyler, Chucky ends up killing the Colonel through the power of sausage and bacon after jumping out at him with a knife, causing him to have a heart attack. The next day, Sergeant Botnick, who cuts the boy's hair, ends up coming across the Chucky doll hidden in one of his cupboards, and comes to the perfectly sane and rational conclusion that this ginger prick needs a haircut. But Chucky's more of the opinion that Botnick's throat needs a cut, and gives him a nice quick short back and sides. Shortly followed by Andy's roommate Whitehurst walking in to see that the Sergeant Botnick has now retired from a life of touching young boys' heads, before running away and telling absolutely nobody about the dead man and the little doll that just killed him. Whitehurst then rejoins everyone as they're about to set off to do their war games, an exercise for the students to perform without all of the fun of violating the Geneva Convention. It's one team against another team playing capture the flag on Blood Gulch, except that Chucky has switched out a load of the paintball bullets for real bullets. Andy and one of his other friends De Silva decide to spontaneously check each other for tonsil stones, before Andy decides that he's got far more important things to do instead of deciphering what she had for breakfast this morning, and leaves to try and save Tyler. Tyler ends up stabbing Chucky with a knife after Andy made the smart decision to give a blade to a literal 8-year-old, before Chucky attacks and captures De Silva and uses her radio to tell Andy that he'll swap her for Tyler, while also using the radios to have the teams converge at the same point and begin firing at each other, killing Shelton in the process. With it not being the first time that Shelton's taken someone else's load to the chest, he then throws a grenade at the group of kids for the fun of it, but Whitehurst jumps onto it to save everyone. With Whitehurst's insides now being on the outsides, Tyler runs towards the nearby carnival, and Andy and De Silva follow to find a dead security guard with his gun taken. But lucky for them, this is America, and the security guard has a second gun conveniently waiting for them. After following Chucky and Tyler into a haunted house attraction, Chucky shoots De Silva in the leg due to his long history of not liking women very much, or anyone really, and after showing off how good of a Boy Scout he is by tying a knot for her, Andy goes after Chucky and Tyler, as Chucky has half of his face sliced off by a giant Grim Reaper that's apparently just chilling in this children's ride with a very real scythe, because screw children and their stupid little faces. After using one of the props to get on top of the ride, Tyler is knocked unconscious, giving Chucky the perfect opportunity to begin conducting the ritual, because apparently doing it back at the school before anyone else knew he even existed was simply too boring. But using the gun taken from De Silva, Andy shoots off his arm because he prefers it with the blade attachment, before throwing him backwards into a giant fan blade, where everyone then lives happily ever after, as there was never another Chucky movie ever made again. Do you want to see uncensored versions of all of my videos going forward? How about getting exclusive access to my Discord server? Well, consider checking out the Patreon or becoming a YouTube member for those benefits. I also shout out each week's new signups at the end of every video as well. And while you're checking things out, how about you take a look at my clothing brand Morbid Minds and seeing if there's anything you like. So starting off with this week's new YouTube signups, a big thank you to Entity101, Gaddy Frederick, Austin Sanders, Frax, AT Detective, Ragnarok935, Hubble Double Trouble, Emil Nielsen, Batgirl727, Cal Ballinger, Cameron, Fundy25, Hazy, Melquier Tabone, Janelli Franco, CS Lavie, Juan G, Jan Montgomery, Hurley0811, and Froglin. Now heading over to this week's new Patreon signups, a massive thank you to Goncalo Tovar, Lance Hicks, Darcy Lane, Joseph Kern, Austin Turner, Matthew Fung, Brian Terada, Gorgon Morgan, Drico E, Aaron Radwan, Nut Rocket, Ain't That Quinton, Rachel Durkin, Jared Taylor, Swank Nebula 69, Hunter Kiblin, Logan Lorilio, Ty, Amimax, Justin Brock, Tendi, Realm Center, Mayako, Niels Hagsman, Manflesh, WGN Gamer, Jake Roylance, Mike Lamb, Rebecca Fritz, M. Daniel, Nick Bodenbender, X Jupiter, Adam Harrison, Mason Burnett, Deadman Walking 13, and Jacob Stevens. So once again, a massive shout out to all of the YouTube members and patrons, and a big thank you to everyone else for watching.